Hey class. So today we're going to be continuing our discussion from radicalization into disinformation and misinformation and fake news. It's an extremely important topic to be talking about, and it is kind of a continuation from before because all of these themes kind of tie together. It's all part of the same media environment that is in flux, but also one of those things that we're constantly having to diagnose and take seriously. So today's going to be a bit of a serious topic that I think we have to pay a lot of attention to because it's not only happening in real time, but from somebody who's been studying this very closely for many years, is getting worse. And I'm going to give you some examples today of it getting worse. There'll be links to my examples in the Substack, and you can click through and watch the videos that I reference in this specific lecture. First, I want to tell you, last week's event went really, really well. The Meme in the Moment on Wednesday was really great. We had a really great set of speakers. And our next event is on December 21st. It's an internet culture event. So it actually incorporates many more speakers. The opening keynote is Dr. Andre Brock Jr., who wrote Distributed Blackness. And it is one of the best books on internet culture that I think I've ever read in my entire life. It has changed the way I look at the internet and media in general. And Dr. Brock will be opening up the entire show. So it's really going to be great. Douglas Rushkoff will also be speaking at the event, as well as a dozen different people. One of the other speakers will be Brandy Zadrozny, who is her piece you'll be reading for homework. And for homework tonight, you'll only have a discussion board. More on that later when we get to local news deserts. So first, I think we should frame this out. We're going to be talking today about misinformation, disinformation, and fake news. Okay, these are parts of our unfortunate part of accelerating news media environment that we're constantly dealing with. We're all susceptible to it. We're all likely in some place where it's possible. We've all been possibly susceptible to fake news or disinformation. Sometimes when things feel too good to be true, we just simply go with it. It's not kind of our fault. It's kind of part of confirmation bias. What I'm going to talk about today, though, is less about disinformation and misinformation and the bad actors that engage in actually making us do those things. As internet culture is becoming more and more of our everyday life, and as internet culture is blending into our real lives, we have to be not only more vigilant, but we really have to be much more tuned, and we also have to hold our journalists up to a higher level of responsibility. Today I'm going to give you some examples of mistakes that were made in journalism that I want to point out because I think a lot of journalists kind of think that some of these conspiracy theories or disinformation campaigns will just go away on their own. There's an old thought by John Stuart Mill about the open and free market, which is that ideas kind of solve themselves, or the free market solves everything. There's another phrase that is, the sun bleaches all bad things. It's like when you have a bunch of bad ideas, if you put it all out in the light, the sun clears it up. I don't think that's true anymore. I think that we're now at a point where people's constitution, meaning their rigidity, their desire to believe something so intently, is so strong and concretized at this point that people would rather double down on their false information than admit any ability to be wrong. And I think that's something that's happening more and more often. We're seeing that as an open grift, so to speak, or a new industry where people who are feeling offended, rather than admit something or apologize, go on CNN and say that CNN's silencing them, and then start a Substack and start writing on Substack to millions and millions of followers. And I think that is a grift. I think that's by design to show that there's an industry for people who feel like they've been ostracized. And I think that's fake. I think that's in bad faith. So let me talk a few things. One, we're going to be talking about good faith and bad faith actors today. When I use those terms, good faith and bad faith actors, a good faith actor is someone who acts in the intention or at least the assumption of truth and valuing as much as they know. So a good faith actor might not be a genius. They might not be a super smart person. They may not be stupid, but they're not intentionally misleading the person they're speaking to. Their job is to be more of like as honest as possible to the best of their ability. That's acting in good faith, even if it does come out wrong or with possibly something that actually doesn't make too much sense. They're still acting in good faith. A lot of people today are acting in very bad faith when they end up on television. They purposely position themselves to be interviewed to act in bad faith. And what that means is they have some sort of malicious intent underneath it. They're using mainstream media as a vehicle to spread their information or disinformation. And in that way, they know how media systems operate, and they're actually able to manipulate how things go on and act maliciously or in bad faith to an audience that they're speaking directly to, which is sometimes what I call a dog whistle, like dog whistle memes. That's the ability to say a coded piece of language that only your audience can hear. And so I think that's part of bad faith actors, is using dog whistle memes. Let's go back. What is journalism? Why do we need journalism? What does journalism do? Misinformation, disinformation, and fake news all are under categories of journalism literacy or news literacies, which is a subset of media literacy. Way back 2011, I taught in the news literacy program at Stony Brook. Previous to that, I was a journalist. I was a video journalist for a very short period of time, and I loved the job. I loved it. I also loved teaching journalism. I taught journalism for about 6 or 7 years, and many of my students have gone on to be on camera on NY1. Luz Pena's in San Francisco. She's won like 8 Emmys now. You might know Shannon Ferry and Justine Rhee of NY1. I'm super proud of the work they're doing, and they're truth seekers. They are looking to find information. I taught digital journalism, which was the incorporation of digital tools and the ability to tell stories with wherever you are. I've seen a phenomenal set of stories being told by people using their iPhone. You don't need the best gear. As you know from right now, I'm using a GoPro and my cell phone to basically operate this. It's the gear you have to tell the stories you can. But it's beyond just the tools. And that's what I'm going to talk about now, is where that separation comes from. Why did I teach journalism? Why did I have journalism students? Why do some of you want to be journalists? You have to be a journalist. There's some certain things that are like structurally necessary. I think the most important is integrity. You can lose your money, you can lose your tools, but you can only lose your reputation once. Integrity is really, really important. It's the ability for people to trust you, or to have a brand of trust that people are aware of what you say and why you say it. You are acting in good faith at most times. That's what integrity is. And so that is your ability to stand up for your beliefs and hold them strong as long as possible, and act in good faith as long as possible. The other thing is truth, the seeking of truth through curiosity, the desire to know how things actually operate. The other thing is ethics. What's the difference between right and wrong? How do we know when things are important to report on? Because beyond those three things, the most important thing a journalist does is holds truth to power. That's what journalism's for. In our founding fathers always felt that journalism was part of the United States as the fourth estate, the extra part of our government, the people that held those in power accountable. If we are unaware of how those who hold power are held accountable, we just assume that authority is standard. We don't get to question it. We don't know what type of nuance is necessary to make sure power doesn't overtake us. Journalists do that. They translate complex ideas to things that are much more understandable to us, that we can really get and make sure we don't lose power, or at least we have the ability to have agency within the systems where power is unequal. That's what a journalist helps us do. So a bunch of this can be about power. Back in 2009, a plane crashed in the Hudson. And at that point, citizen journalism was kind of made, it was invented. It existed before then, but the real amplification of citizen journalism started happening. A man named Janis Krums was on a ferry in the Hudson at the time of Captain Sully Sullenberg's crash of Flight 1549. And when the crash came down, Janis had an iPhone 3G and took a picture through the dirty glass. And that picture became front page in the LA Times and the Charlotte Observer. Some journalists work their entire lives to get a front page photo, and Janis did it just by being there, by taking a photo. Janis was not a citizen journalist, but afterward was, because the ability to be there as a citizen and a journalist is important. That they could tell stories, but tell it basically doing what a journalist would do, which is capturing something in its instant and bringing it to the public from that moment. However, is Janis a true journalist? As a citizen journalist, as somebody who's on YouTube with a microphone, are they truly journalists? Why do people still spend $100,000 to go to journalism school when you could literally just have a cell phone and be a journalist? There's so many skills to learn to make you a journalist, and most specifically is accuracy and trying to make sure that, like I said, ethics and integrity are at play. This is very important to recognize because citizen journalism then just became like a kind of a term to throw around, and people started claiming themselves as the authority figure, the truth teller. But I always ask this question, which I've asked probably before, which is if you are seeking information or you need to fix something, very often you go on YouTube. I've said this many times. You've figured out how to fix something on YouTube. You're like, I don't know how to fix this. I need to replace the light in my car. YouTube it, fix the light. So you could Google how to be most anything. Can you be a citizen mechanic? Can you be a citizen plumber? Can you be a citizen surgeon? If you YouTube how to do stitches, does that make you a surgeon? Can you do surgery from YouTube? How come some things are exclusive to school-based learning and some aren't? Why is journalism that one that has to be in that space where you could kind of pretend to be it because you learned something about holding a camera the right way? That's a question that I have been tackling for many, many years. And my most important takeaway from this is that it's because of the way in which we learn how to do journalism and identify things that are false, fake, dis, and malicious information. Misinformation is information making you led astray. It's either information by omission or commission. It's information that is left out. That's misinformation. Disinformation is basically on the edge of fake news. Disinformation is designed to push conspiracy theory or spread lies. Fake news is just straight up fabrication. One of the most famous pieces of fake news happened during 2016 election campaign when a fake news site, abcnews.co instead of .com, posted an article that says the Pope endorses Donald Trump. It was fake, but it got shared millions of times before being taken down by the social media networks. And it was fake, fully fake news, but people believed it because of confirmation bias. That's fake news. But we also have an additional problem when it comes to fake news and mis and disinformation, which is journalism's ability to have a diverse set of truth tellers. What you're going to read tonight is about local news deserts, where over the course of the last 15 years, social media sites have slowly eroded local news systems. They've moved local news into Facebook groups. So instead of having a local newspaper with a staff of reporters who report on small town information, which is very important, we've lost local news, leaving a news desert or an information vacuum. That information gets filled by citizen journalists or Facebook pages. It gets filled up because people don't stop wanting news just because local newspapers disappear. They still want to know things. They just don't have access to that information. So we have to understand that that's part of how things have gone awry. And here's why it gets really, really scary. It gets scary because of probably the most recent conspiracy theories that have really engaged with local areas, that have become very insidious inside of our networks. Today's election day. I will be going voting in a bit, but it's important to vote because it's part of how democracy works. But it's also because the way that civic life is now engaging with internet conspiracy theories is frightening, and we really have to be vigilant against that. I'm going to show you a short story about QAnon and where it is taking a role into everyday life. Recently, Ben Collins reported on QAnon's new maneuver. The article is in the Substack. And QAnon's new maneuver is to have some of its QAnon adherents run for local schools board of ed. And they're doing this because they've used education as kind of this like flashpoint or partisan cultural war. And in doing so, they want to basically recreate a government in their image. Keep in mind, QAnon is what Anna Merlan, the journalist Anna Merlan for Vice, she calls the conspiracy singularity, which is when a lot of different conspiracy theories fall under one specific ideology. In this case, it's probably QAnon as an umbrella conspiracy theory, which at its very core believes that liberals are a cabal of child-eating monsters, and that this, and just those words alone are kind of crazy. But beyond that, they are basically basically a fascist, almost a pseudo-fascist group of People who have changed their ideology to believe in certain aspects of reality that don't align with objective reality. QAnon believers truly believe that this cabal is going to install demons into people, like actually demons. Like, this isn't a joke. But it's so much so that a lot of these people have started listening or going to QAnon conferences. At the most recent QAnon conference, former General Flynn said this quote, "Local action equals national impact." And what General Flynn was telling QAnon adherents to do was run for school boards, basically recreate the government. And so that article that Ben Collins reports on shows this. I want you to watch the video if you get a chance of that Ben Collins interview, because it isn't so much about Ben Collins' story on this. That's Brandy Zadrozny's research partner at NBC News. But what I really want you to see when you look at that article is how the other reporter interacts with Ben. Throughout the entire news piece, she laughs it off. Ha ha, look at these QAnoners running for school board. Ha ha, giggling, laughing. It's not funny. It's really not funny at all. This is a truly terrible belief system that has now resulted in many children being kidnapped and several children being killed. There's been terrible stories about parents kidnapping their children and killing them because they were afraid that they were filled with demons. I'm not going into any more of the graphic details of this, but that is literally based on QAnon beliefs. Many QAnoners were the people that did the insurrection, the QAnon shaman being the most famous, but many others were holding Q flags as they went in because they believe in the big lie. The big lie is an anti-democratic belief that democracy itself no longer works. The big lie is named after the big lie of World War II. In this case, it was pushed by Donald Trump to say that the election was illegitimate and that Donald Trump is currently still the president, but the president in exile, while President Biden is simply a resident of the White House. This is a true belief by QAnoners. This is anti-democratic. It basically is a slow erosion of democracy. And the more we normalize it, or the more we just laugh it off thinking it'll go away, means it won't. It just won't go away. And so the last bit of this is that the weirdest and scariest part of this is that Ron Watkins is now running for Congress in Arizona. For those of you who don't know who Ron Watkins is, he and Jim Watkins, his father, run 8kun, the terrible message board online that used to host some of the manifestos of mass killers and a lot of actual child pornography. It's a terrible site. He's running now for Congress as under the banner of QAnon. And he, at one point, likely ran the Q account. He is likely one of the Q posters, which means the big lie, QAnon, is responsible by this person who is now running for US Congress. Whether he wins or loses is not the question. The problem is that he's seeking legitimacy through the news. He got on CNN to tell people that Trump is still the president. The news reporter, of course, goes, haha, this can't be real. Everybody knows you're lying and it's false. It doesn't matter. Ron Watkins at the most recent QAnon conference said, "I'm using the media to my advantage." And he giggled about it because he knows exactly what he's doing as a bad faith actor. He's spreading disinformation. He's making sure that you hear falsities in public view. On CNN, on mainstream media, you hear it. And whether or not you know that it's disinformation, there are people out there who don't know that it's disinformation and take it as information because it comes across the news. In other words, by giving people like Ron Watkins a platform, it allows them legitimacy inside of our speech areas. There has to be a line drawn at some point. Disinformation is now a profit system on social media. We know our algorithms, and based on the Facebook leaks, we even know more. We know that disinformation is a profitable system. People are more likely to engage when they're angry and fearful. So when they're angry and fearful, they're likely to share that information. And that means disinfo does a lot better than real info because it makes people kind of wiry and weird. So for homework, I'm actually interested in you reading Brandy Zadrozny's piece about a small town in Pennsylvania, a news desert, a place that didn't have local news, and the news gap was filled by a message board, a Facebook group. And I want to know a bit about, what do you think of it? What was the most impactful part of that story? Read it carefully. This is part of the discussion. And the other part is, what do you do to combat fake news? How do you, the class, what do you do? How do you make sure when you hear something that's disinfo or misinfo, what's your stance? How do you know how to combat it? What do you do to stop that? What are some strategies? Please share. at least 2 to 3 strategies inside the discussion board that you've used or you want to use or you can use to combat mis and disinformation. It's really important that we get a collective kind of sense about this. And in the following week, next week, and the week after, we're actually going to talk about movements, social media movements, which is really important to me. I think that's a big part of how we understand social media and how its collective action is possible. I think social media isn't all bad. I've said this before. I think social media can be a force for good as long as we act collectively. But it does mean that we have to be responsible users of it. So all of this is to say that as we gain the power to tell stories with tools around us, it doesn't make us the journalists, but it does mean that we have to hold our journalists accountable and responsible for making sure they're holding truth to power. It's a lot of us on both sides. We have to bring ourselves to that. We also have to hold journalists to the standards of what journalism is, which is making sure we understand how we exist inside of this space. Everything is chaotic, everything is confusing. Someone has to tell us stories, and we hope that they do their best to be responsible about that so we become well-informed citizens who make really good citizen choices, voting choices, and consumer choices. That's how we live inside of this society that makes it operate in a way that functions. So, for that matter, I mean, this lecture is just to continue to tell you to stay vigilant and stay curious, so keep doing that.